One case file, buried deep in a psychoanalytic journal from the 1970s, contains a sentence you do not expect to see in a medical text at all. A patient, lying in bed, felt something invisible press against his side, merge with him, and then, in his words, he gave himself to it. No visible attacker. No footprints, no fibers, no fingerprints. Just a body, a mind, and a memory of being assaulted by something. Tonight, we open file 12-4, Incubi, Succubi, and the Strangers in the Night. Demons with a job description. For centuries, cultures across Europe gave those somethings a name. A male spirit who forces sex on a sleeper was called an incubus. A female equivalent was a succubus. Church authorities took them seriously enough that a 5th-10th century papal bull complained that many men and women had given themselves to evil spirits, both incubi and succubi. The vocabulary is revealing. Incubus comes from the Latin for one who presses or crushes, an older echo of what modern victims describe as a crushing weight on the chest, an unseen body pinning them down. Medieval storytellers embroidered the idea. Demons, they claimed, could take on human form by slipping into fresh corpses, turning them into perfect doubles of dead lovers or spouses. Witches and warlocks were accused of sleeping with such beings in exchange for supernatural power. Entire lineages of half-demon children were blamed on these unions. Behind the theology sits a simple pattern: people waking in the dark, unable to move, convinced that they are not alone. What changes is the label: demon, fairy, alien, ghost, or psychological episode. In the 20th century, psychiatrists, parapsychologists, and psychical researchers began comparing old demonology with modern case files. What they found is unnerving. The language changes, but the experiences rhyme. Cases at the edge of the bed. Case 1. Carlotta Moran and the Entity, the best-known modern file, appears in both fiction and the archive. Frank de Felita's novel, The Entity, and the film it inspired are based on the reported experiences of a California woman, usually called Carlotta Moran. In the mid-1970s, she told psychiatrists that she was being repeatedly assaulted by an invisible presence in her home. She described being thrown on the bed, pinned down, and violated by something she could not see. Doctors who examined her noted bruises that, in their view, did not match her account of accidental injury or self-harm. Unlike most victims, Carlotta claimed she could sometimes see her attacker. Once, she said, it appeared as a squat, dwarf-like figure. Another time it was tall, muscular, green-skinned, and disturbingly well-formed. The Entity developed a cruel personality. It spoke, taunted her, and attacked not only at night, but in full daylight. Investigators also reported classic poltergeist activity in the house: flying crockery, abusive voices, sudden crashes and thuds with no clear source. To them, this blend of physical marks and household disturbances suggested that whatever was happening was not purely dream or suggestion. Skeptical reviewers saw something else: a vulnerable woman under extreme stress, possibly with a history of trauma, caught between suggestible investigators and her own nightmares. Bruises, they noted, are easy to misinterpret. Objects fall. Memory is malleable. The case sits in a gray zone, medically documented but not medically understood. Case 2. Marcia and the Sea Goddess, another file, takes us to the beaches of Brazil. A young psychologist we'll call Marcia found a plaster statue of the sea goddess Yamanya washed up on the sand near Sao Paulo. She took it home as a curiosity, placing it in her small apartment. Soon after, the disturbances began. Appliances failed without warning. Crockery cracked in empty rooms. Once, her oven reportedly exploded for no clear reason. She felt watched, then oppressed. One night, as she lay in bed, she sensed the mattress dip. An unseen weight slid in beside her. What followed in her account was a SA by an invisible presence, terrifying, invasive, and horribly vivid. The experience recurred on several nights, always in the same room, always with the statue somewhere within sight. Frightened and increasingly unstable, Marcia consulted an occultist. The advice was simple: return the statue to the sea. She did, and the disturbances stopped. One reading is psychological. The statue, with its religious and erotic associations, became a focus for anxiety and guilt. The exploding appliances and other incidents were chance events woven into a narrative of haunting. Another reading is literal. By bringing the figure home, she invited in a spirit that only left when it was ritually dismissed. The file itself doesn't settle the question. It just records that before the return something was happening, and after it, nothing was. Case 3. The Policeman and the Voice in the Dark. Medium and psychologist Stan Gooch spent years collecting accounts of entity attacks. In one experiment, he documented the experiences of a former policeman. At first, the man heard tapping sounds and muffled conversations in an empty room. Then he felt definite, targeted contact, fingers running through his hair, pressure on his toes while he tried to sleep. The events escalated one night when he suddenly felt a heavy body press against him from behind in bed. Clearly male, he said, unmistakably sexual and violently insistent. He couldn't see anyone, but the bed shook with the effort. Terrified, he mentally shouted, "Get off!" and the pressure lifted. Days later, a different presence arrived, this time female, and again tried to force itself on him. The man described the assault as cruel and violent, leaving him exhausted and shaken when he finally slipped into natural sleep. For Gooch, this was one tile in a wider mosaic. In his files are elderly widows who feel their dead spouses sit on the bed, touch their hands, or speak in the dark. Other surveys of the bereaved report that many widows and widowers experience something similar in the months or years after a partner dies, voices, touches, even the feeling of someone lying down beside them. A pattern emerges. Younger, sexually conflicted people are more likely to report rapacious entities, incubi, succubi, demons. Older, lonely people describe gentler presences, comforting ghosts of partners they desperately miss. Is that a window into the spirit world, or a mirror held up to the human psyche? Case 4. Ruth Trauma That Walks. Then there is Ruth, a patient documented by psychiatrist Morton Schatzman. As a child, Ruth was abused by her father. As an adult, she developed a complex pattern of symptoms, dissociation, vivid waking imagery, and what older psychiatrists would have called hysterical episodes. Ruth described seeing an apparition of her father that acted like an incubus, approaching her bed, attempting to repeat the abuse of her childhood. That terror was real. The body reacted as though the attack were physical. But Ruth's experiences didn't stop there. She also claimed she could create a double of her husband, Paul, an exact replica that would appear beside her in bed, specifically for physical intimacy. In her mind, this double was more approachable, more loving, easier to accept than the real Paul lying only inches away. She reported experiencing climax with this apparition, which she experienced as completely external. Most unsettling of all, there were occasions when other people in the room reported seeing the same figure she did, or at least sensing someone present where no one stood. To mainstream clinicians, Ruth's case is a powerful example of trauma externalized. The mind splits a person into separate figures, abuser, protector, partner, and then experiences those figures as if they were independent beings. To psychical researchers, it raises a more radical possibility that intense emotion and vivid imagery might sometimes spill into a shared space, becoming what occult traditions call thought forms, mental constructs dense enough to be perceived by more than one person. Neither camp can prove its side outright. The case sits, again, in tension. Case 5, the poltergeist thread throughout these files. One recurring detail refuses to go away. People who report violent, intimate encounters with invisible beings often also report poltergeist-like disturbances. Moving furniture, thrown stones, spontaneous fires, electrical failures, sharp raps and bangs in otherwise quiet rooms. In the previously mentioned psychoanalytic case, the one with the line about giving himself to the presence, The patient's experiences began after a séance. He later suffered bouts of spontaneous bleeding from the mouth that medical tests couldn't explain. Alongside this came nights when invisible fingers tugged at his hair, and a bodiless presence lay beside him, pressing close, merging with him. Researchers who study poltergeists have noticed that such outbreaks often cluster around adolescents or people under extreme emotional strain. The intimate nature of some incidents, torn clothing, obscene messages, groping touches, creates a bridge between the classic poltergeist case and the classic incubus encounter. Correlation is not causation, but the overlap suggests that whatever we call incubi and succubi may belong to the same family of experiences as poltergeists, events in which emotion, environment, and expectation collide in unpredictable, sometimes violent ways. The weight on the chest. So what, if anything, ties all these cases together? Hypothesis 1. Sleep paralysis. The cleanest candidate is sleep paralysis. In this state, the mind wakes up before the body fully releases the paralysis that normally keeps us from acting out our dreams. People report an overwhelming pressure on the chest, difficulty breathing, racing heart, and the conviction that someone or something is in the room. In many cultures, that figure is an old hag sitting on the sleeper's chest. It's like waking up inside a locked diving suit. Your eyes are open, your thoughts are racing, but every muscle is clamped in place. Any stray image, a coat on a chair, a shadow on the ceiling, can be misread by a brain desperate to assign a shape to the threat. Sleep paralysis neatly explains the inability to move, the crushing sensation, and the intense fear. It even accounts for the heightened sexual feelings some victims report, as oxygen restriction and panic flood the body with hormones. Modern neuroscience adds another layer. Misfiring circuits in the brain's body mapping regions can create a sense of a presence that feels separate from, yet intimately close to the self. In a half-waking state, that phantom self can easily be recast as an attacker. But sleep paralysis struggles outside the bedroom. It doesn't explain appliances exploding in other rooms, stones thrown, or multiple witnesses seeing the same apparition at the same time. It doesn't account for Carlotta's reported daylight attacks unless we assume those were misremembered or misreported. Sleep paralysis is powerful, but incomplete. It looks like one chapter, not the whole book. Hypothesis 2. Trauma, projection, and thought forms. Cases like Ruth's point toward another mechanism. Trauma externalized. In modern psychology, intrusive images and dissociative episodes are understood as common responses to severe abuse. The mind replays what happened, but sometimes it reshapes the cast, turning an abuser into a demon, or splitting a partner into good and bad, doubles that feel like separate people. From this angle, incubi and succubi are not invaders from outside but dramatized pieces of the self. The bedroom becomes a stage where shame, desire, guilt, and fear put on costumes drawn from religion, folklore, or pop culture. Stan Gutsch pushes the idea further. He suggests that intense thoughts and fantasies, particularly intimate ones, might be capable of forming quasi-physical presences, entities that behave like independent beings, even though they originate in the human psyche. Occult traditions have a word for this: thought forms or tulpas. Parapsychologists point to cases where several witnesses seem to perceive the same figure, or where emotional turmoil appears to drive poltergeist-like events around a single individual. Mainstream science remains skeptical. It prefers explanations that stop at the skin: hallucination, misperception, suggestibility, and coincidence. At present, there is no widely accepted evidence that thoughts can directly move objects or generate shared apparitions. Still, for those who have lived through these experiences, the difference between inside and outside sometimes feels academic. If a projection can bruise you, wake you screaming, or tear apart your kitchen, how imaginary is it? Hypothesis 3. Cultures mask over the unknown. There is also the question of why these beings look the way they do. Christians report visions of the Virgin Mary and angels far more often than atheists. Medieval Europeans saw incubi and succubi. In 20th century Brazil, a statue of a sea goddess becomes the focus of haunting. In late 20th century America, many experiencers talk about clinical examinations on alien spacecraft. Today, a common figure is the shadow person at the bedside. The underlying experience of felt presence, bodily paralysis or violation, overwhelming terror or desire may be broadly similar. The costumes change with the culture. From this perspective, the demon is a mask stitched from whatever imagery is ready to hand. The core may be a neurological glitch, a trauma response, an episode of sleep paralysis, or some other, as yet unknown process. Our beliefs decide what shape that core takes when we try to describe it. But that doesn't make the experiences trivial or easily dismissed. Masks can be powerful. They can drive people to religion, to therapy, to exorcism, or to the edge of sanity. Whether or not there is anything out there, something very real is happening in here, haunted by ourselves. At the end of his survey, Stan Gooch offers a line that both skeptics and believers can sit with. He suggests that incubi, succubi, demons and poltergeists may not be visitors from another world at all, but manifestations of parts of ourselves that we struggle to face directly. It's one possible reading. In that view, every weight on the chest, every whisper in the dark, every invisible touch is the mind speaking in symbols, desire, guilt, grief, and fear clothed in the mythology we know best. The monster is us, and the bedroom is a private theater where unfinished stories play out. The other reading accepts that the experience may start inside but doesn't necessarily end there. If human emotion can sometimes spill into the environment, moving objects, sparking electrical failures, leaving marks on the body, then the mind might be both victim and author of a phenomenon that bridges psychology and physics. In that world, thought forms and poltergeists are clumsy names for a class of events we do not yet have the language or the instruments to fully measure. Between those poles, the record stays stubbornly incomplete. We have testimony, medical notes, surveys of the bereaved, photographs of wrecked rooms, and a scattering of bruises. We have no controlled experiment that can summon an incubus on demand, no meter that can distinguish a traumatized projection from an outside intelligence. What we can prove is modest. What it implies is not. So the next time someone wakes pinned to their mattress by an unseen weight, the question remains the same one these files keep asking. Are they being visited by something from the dark, or by a part of themselves that refuses to stay quiet? Either way, the mystery doesn't end when morning comes. It just slips back into the deep archive of the mind, waiting for the next night and the next witness to give it form. Because every mystery, even the ones that sleep beside us, hides a truth